Hey, buddy. Are you gonna do the video with me? Yay. Hi, I'm Carrie, and this is Saunders Sisterhood. This is a YouTube channel for the single and childless, not by choice person. Today, I am going to do a reaction video on an article that the New York Times recently put out. And it is about the unspoken grief or disenfranchised grief of never becoming a grandparent. The title is The Unspoken Grief of Never Becoming a Grandparent. I haven't been able to read this whole article, so I'm gonna put that all out there. It's beyond a paywall. But I've read bits and pieces just as it's kind of gotten more into social media. And I wanted to do a reaction around it because I'm seeing a lot of intense feelings that are going around, my algorithm at least, around the topic of grandparents experiencing some grief when their children are choosing not to have kids. I want to start off by saying that I am not actually trying to imply that the grief of not having children is the same as the grief of not having grandchildren. And the grief and the impact of that grief did strike me as having some similarities that I wanted to talk about. And the thing that really propelled me to want to do a reaction video on this is less about the article itself and more about the comments that I was seeing to the article. These comments are rabid. They are fierce. They are intense. I don't know if it's because this is just coming off the election, but there is some real anger toward the topic of people feeling grief around not having grandchildren. So I'm going to read some of these for you, and I'm just going to like pull some at random. I'm looking off the New York Times _well because it was part of their wellness Instagram around it. And again, I'm just going to read off a few because they're like, one is the unspoken grief of never owning a home. So kind of am comparing those two. The unspoken grief of being denied a viable future and habitable planet by the insatiable consumerism and unfathomable selfishness of previous generations within the global north. I didn't leave a good enough world for my children to have their own, but I'm going to center it as being an issue targeting me. Boomers are perpetually trying to eat from a garden they didn't tend to. It's not a daughter's job to fulfill the wishes of their mothers. Well, yes, I think that's true. Go foster a kid or volunteer or literally just get your own life. There's so many kids that need supportive adults in their lives. Why does anyone care about living children who actually, why doesn't anyone care about living children who actually need positive adult figures in their life? This one kind of reminds me of people who tell women who can't have kids, why don't you just adopt? So again, that's just a smattering. Again, there's like almost 9,000 comments on this, and those are just a few, but it's pretty representative of the intensity that's happening in these comment sections. So again, I have not been able to read this full article because it's behind a paywall, but one of the things that I saw, and again, I don't know if it's, you know, the whole tone of the article or just the specific piece that came out, but there was mention of these parents who were taking part in this article, really emphasizing that they understand that this is the right choice for their children and they support their children in it. They even recognize that that's the thing with kids. They grow up to make their own decisions. And so overall, they support their children. And the piece of this article is that all of those things can be true and they experience grief related to the fact that they always envision themselves being grandparents and they're having to come to terms with the fact that they won't. You know, I think the comments really torch these people in terms of implying that they shouldn't have feelings over somebody else's decisions. And if they have any type of uncomfortable feelings, or at least acknowledge those feelings, that makes them entitled, and that their generation actually created the environment in which people don't want to have children, so they are not entitled to have any feelings related to this. And then the ironic part about it is that the article also is about the fact that it's disenfranchised grief and that these parents are feeling like they are not supposed to talk about it or they can't talk about it, that they feel unseen in it and misunderstood in it. And I gotta tell you, I can kind of see why. And it's another area in which feels very similar to the grief related to not being able to have children or being childless, not by choice. Again, that disenfranchised grief that is not seen, it's not validated, and it's also surrounding a non-event versus an event. So as a person who's childless, not by choice, the same way that I had to, and maybe you have to, rethink your future, kind of think about how you're interacting with your friends, finding things to talk about with your friends, finding things in common with your friends who are in the thick of raising their children. All of the ways in which not having children shapes my life and actually makes it different from the friends and people in my age who are raising children right now, all the ways in which the fact that I don't have kids and they do have kids, the ways in which it seems to separate us. And I imagine that's similar when you're of an age where all your friends are becoming grandparents and you're not. Grandparents talking about their excitement, the pregnancy, first birthdays, all the milestones that come along. The old cliche, right, is, oh, grandparenting is so fabulous. I would have done that first if I knew how great it was. Sharing the pictures, talking a lot about your grandkids. It's similar to when you're of a certain age and all your friends are having kids and talking about all of those things, but just from the parent perspective. I imagine when you're of an age where people are grandparents, that I imagine that it's very similar. In fact, when I get to be an age where people are starting to be grandparents, many people in the childless, not by choice community talk about how that grief sort of re-triggers and restarts. When you're of a certain age and all your friends are having kids, it's kind of at the height and then it dies off a little bit, so I'm told. And quite frankly, is what I'm experiencing a little bit as I get older. My friends aren't getting pregnant anymore. I'm not dealing with baby showers, all of that stuff. But when I get to be a grandparent age, I've heard that it cycles over again. And I know that especially when I was of an age where all my friends were getting pregnant and being super excited about it and things like that, it hit hard and it definitely felt isolating and it didn't really feel like it was something I was supposed to talk about because I was meant to be really excited for them and how having babies around was going to be the most fun thing ever, all of those things. And, I felt like I couldn't really share my feelings around it. And that's exactly what my perception is that these grandparents are saying, or non-grandparents are saying in this article, that they don't feel like they can talk about it. And based on the comments, I can sure as shit see why they cannot talk about it. I mean, these people are getting slayed in these comments, being called entitled, selfish, they reaped what they sow, that it's their fault. Really not a lot of nuance or the ability to hold both things. I'm not even saying those things are true, but not being able to hold both things at once. That you can be really supportive of your child's decision that they don't want to have kids, it's not for them, but also feel grief around the fact that you now have to kind of rework what you thought your future was going to be in terms of being a grandparent. What's wrong with that? It's hard, and I don't understand why we can't have sympathy for that. I also know that in the childless, not by choice community, this comes up in terms of I can't have kids, I'm an only child, or my other sibling isn't having kids, and kind of feeling the weight of that, even on behalf of your parents. And those are things that, we talk about and we work through. But the feeling's already out there for people. That feeling is there, and feelings are okay. Like, why can't we allow people to experience feelings, especially when they're going out of their way to say, I'm supportive of this person's decision, and it does make me sad a bit. And I feel like I actually can't talk about it because I'm not supposed to talk about it. And then ripping people in the comments because of how they feel, thereby reinforcing the fact that they actually can't talk about it. What's wrong with us in terms of how we talk about grief? I know what it's like to be going through, to have gone through a type of disenfranchised grief. And I am the last person that's going to judge somebody who is also going through a disenfranchised grief. I'm also not going to be telling somebody that they shouldn't be having any feelings around, particularly related to grief, around an event that didn't happen. I know what that's like to be told, well, at least blah, blah, blah. Or there's so many unwanted kids in the world. Why don't you just adopt? Or why don't you do all of these other things? And it's like, okay, sure, but that's missing the point. Okay, I saw that my lighting was getting really bad. I hope wasn't horrible for a long time. It isn't just about not having a baby or a grandchild. It's about how that then impacts every area of your life, because our society and our culture is completely centered around those things. Not being a mom, not being a grandparent, it doesn't mean that life can't be fulfilling. It doesn't mean that life can't be meaningful. But it is definitely a jerk to the left that comes out of nowhere and often isn't expected. And there is literally no recipe and no blueprint for how to live a life when you don't have children or you don't have grandchildren, when you're socially conditioned to expect that that's going to be that will be a part of certain seasons of your life. So I'll be interested to read more pieces of this article once it comes out from beyond the paywall. And if you've read the article or you have thoughts or feelings around it, I'd love for you to share those nicely and respectfully in the comments. And if you are a single person or you're a person without children, not by choice, subscribe to Saunders Sisterhood for more videos for the single and childless, not by choice person.